HOA president thought he was untouchable. Then I followed the money. When I bought a little place in a quiet-looking suburb, I figured I was buying peace and a lawn I could mow on Saturdays without anyone caring. Instead, I landed in a miniature kingdom ruled by our HOA president, Brad, the kind of guy who gets high on paperwork and low on accountability. He wrote fines like love letters and delivered them with a grin. $200 if your trash can sat at the curb 1 minute past 9 a.m. $50 if your grass dared to look thirsty. Meanwhile, his own yard was a catalog of violations, a fence taller than the ordinance, a pergola nobody permitted, and a shed that looked like it grew there overnight. The worst part wasn't the hypocrisy. It was the way he treated the HOA bank account like it was his personal gas card. I tried being reasonable. My fence stain was off by a shade because the approved color was out of stock. I showed receipts, explained the shortage, offered to resign as soon as the shipment came in. Brad smirked, said, "Rules are rules," and slapped me with a $500 fine like he was tipping a waiter. I walked away with my jaw tight and a plan forming. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't start a street circus. I'd do it slow, quiet, and legal until there wasn't a rung left on his little ladder. The first step was simple. Stop reacting, start recording. I wrote down dates, saved notices, and took pictures of every time his fence cast a shadow where it shouldn't. If you push a bully in public, he wins the sympathy vote. If you hand a bully to the rules he worships, he trips on his own scripture. I started learning our bylaws like I was studying for a final. I learned who actually voted at meetings, who always nodded when Brad talked, and who avoided eye contact because they didn't want to be next. There's a special calm that shows up once you choose your lane and commit. Mine was paperwork, process, and patience. I knew the man loved power more than he loved being careful. All I had to do was outlast him and line up the right dominoes. I didn't know yet how dirty the money trail was, but I could smell it. The day I chose patience, Brad made the mistake of underestimating me. Step 1 was getting inside without setting off alarms. I told Brad I wanted to be more involved and build community, and I wore my best eager newbie face. He welcomed me to the board because he liked an audience, and he liked people who seemed impressionable. I kept that mask on for 2 solid years. I showed up to every meeting, sat near the end of the table, and let him talk himself into knots. I watched how he ran votes when his friends were present, how he tabled motions if a skeptic walked in late, and how paperwork went missing if it didn't support what he wanted. He ruled by fatigue. If you dared to push back, he buried you in email threads and policy attachments like sandbags. He'd schedule special votes at times only his allies could attend, then brag about democracy in action. I played along, kept minutes, took notes he didn't know I was taking, and learned who was open to change. My plan was to wait out his term and then start carefully fixing the plumbing he'd clogged on purpose. But the clock didn't have to run out for me to see what he really was. Somewhere in those 2 years, a pattern turned into a picture. The pool stayed closed for maintenance that never finished. The landscaping looked like it belonged to a foreclosed house. Yet our HOA dues were higher than comparable neighborhoods, and Brad kept saying, "We're being responsible," like that sentence paid the bills. I started asking for the budget, not loudly, not accusatory, just as a board member doing his job. He brushed me off with that casual arrogance some people wear like cologne. "I've got it handled, Ben." So I stopped asking and started requesting, formally, in writing, citing the bylaws he loved to throw at everyone else. He ignored the first letter. He misplaced the second. By the third, I was collecting signatures from neighbors who were tired of the pool excuses and brown hedges and mystery fees. The mask stayed on. The notes kept growing. When Brad finally handed me numbers, I saw smoke rolling off the page. Step 2 was money, because money tells the truth even when people won't. I filed the request properly, forced it onto the agenda, and made it impossible to ignore without violating the rules in front of half the board. Brad stalled, tried to joke, then sighed like I was asking him to donate a kidney. Weeks later, he dropped a folder on the table, thin, disorganized, and already suspicious. I took it home and spread everything out under a desk lamp the way you do when you're about to fix a machine that's been rattling for too long. It was a carnival of nonsense. Invoices with no vendors attached. Expenses labeled administrative that could have been anything from Staples to trips to Vegas. A $15,000 landscaping payment made to a company that didn't exist in the state registry. I cross-checked bank statements against county filings and contractor licenses, and the same names kept circling back, Brad's, and a buddy named Kyle who seemed to handle most maintenance without ever posting a legal bid. The math smelled like a sweaty gym bag. The dates overlapped with pool closed signs. The totals didn't match what we collected, and the differences didn't vanish into mulch or chlorine. I started knocking on doors with questions, not accusations. Folks had stories. One neighbor swore he saw Kyle's crew working exclusively at Brad's house on a community ticket. Another said Brad's kids swam at the pool all through the closure while everyone else read, out of order, taped to the gate. Over a dozen homeowners told me they'd requested the budget in past years and got ignored, patronized, or ghosted. I logged it all. I copied every page. I backed up the backups. Brad had counted on boredom beating outrage. He thought no one would care enough to follow the thread all the way through the needle. But I'm stubborn, and I like puzzles, and I was already angry in a way that doesn't come out loud. It comes out accurate. So I kept pulling until the whole sweater loosened in my hands. The next stack of bank statements showed his name where no name belonged. Step 3 was building the case clean enough to survive a hurricane. I organized everything into folders. Invoices, bank statements, screenshots of vendor lookups, photos of Brad's fence and backyard projects, and a timeline of when the pool mysteriously needed maintenance. I built a spreadsheet that cross-referenced payments against any physical work anyone actually saw. Whole months of landscaping had no footprints on the grass. Where I was missing pieces, I knocked on doors, asked simple questions, and wrote down answers in plain language. You don't win these things with drama. You win them with dates and dollar signs that don't blink. The deeper I went, the more the pattern sharpened. Brad would inflate a contractor estimate, run the payment through a shell vendor, and the overage would land in an account he controlled. Sometimes the shell looked like a real business until you checked state filings and saw the address was a mailbox near a donut shop. His buddy Kyle appeared on nearly every work order that mattered. Pools, irrigation, lighting, you name it. And yet we had no competitive bids, no signed scopes, and no completion certificates. If you tried to ask for receipts, Brad would claim confidentiality, like we were guarding nuclear secrets. I added witness statements. Neighbors who watched Kyle's crew pour a patio at Brad's place on a day the ledger said common area concrete repair. 2 different people had photos of the truck, and the date stamps matched the expense report. The file thickened into something with its own gravity. I didn't leak a word. Not yet. I wanted one room, one night, one microphone, and one vote. The annual meeting was coming, and I planned to pack the room. Step 4 was the coup, and it needed bodies and chairs. Historically, our annual HOA meeting drew 12 sleepy people and a cheese tray. Brad liked it that way. I spent 3 weeks on foot knocking doors, explaining our dues, our costs, and why the pool had been a joke. I didn't accuse, I invited. Come hear the numbers, decide for yourself, and vote. I brought copies of bylaws that showed exactly how removal worked. I answered questions about retaliation because everyone feared it. I promised transparency even if folks disagreed with me later. People responded to respect. They RSVP'd with their feet. The night of the meeting, the community room looked like election day. Standing room only, neighbors along the walls, folks I'd never seen at any HOA thing. Young families, retirees, renters who didn't even get a vote but wanted a glimpse. Brad stuck to his usual script about how thankless the role was, how hard he worked, and how sacrifices sometimes go unnoticed. Then I stood. Calm voice. No sarcasm. Brad, can you explain these discrepancies in the budget? He tried to wave me off. Not the time, Ben, but the room wasn't having it. It's exactly the time, someone said behind me. I handed stacks of my report to the front row and kept passing them back. Pages flipped. Eyes widened. Murmurs turned into questions. Questions turned into shouts. Brad tried to gavel us into order without a gavel. A neighbor asked about the 15 grand. Another asked about the mailbox landscaper. The air changed. I moved for a vote to remove the president under the removal clause, seconded it, and called roll. Hands shot up so fast Brad went pale under the fluorescent lights. Brad was out before he knew what hit him. The motion carried by an absurd margin, more than 2/3, clean and decisive. He sputtered something about procedural defects and defamation, then stormed out trailing 2 allies who looked like they'd swallowed a battery. We kept the meeting going. We appointed an interim president, filled 2 empty board seats with people who actually wanted to serve, and voted, on the record, to hire an independent auditor to comb every line item for 3 years back. I offered my files to the auditor and stepped aside. If I'd messed up anything, I wanted that revealed too. The room didn't feel vengeful, it felt relieved. Folks asked reasonable questions: term limits, dual signatures on checks, online access to minutes and budgets. We wrote motions and passed them while we had the quorum. Someone offered to run the community website. A retired bookkeeper raised her hand to serve as assistant treasurer. It felt like a neighborhood again, not a franchise with one angry franchisee. Afterward, Brad's buddy Kyle lingered in the parking lot like trouble trying to grow legs. He muttered something about lawyers and misunderstandings, and "you'll be hearing from us." I told him to have a good night and to direct all communication through the auditor or our counsel. He didn't like that sentence, but he walked away. I slept like a kid after a long swim. The auditor's first email landed with a subject line that spiked my pulse. The subject line read, "Preliminary findings, immediate concerns." I opened it at my kitchen table with coffee I promptly forgot to drink. The auditor outlined clear red flags: vendor payments to non-registered entities, reimbursements without receipts, duplicate charges with identical amounts weeks apart, and cash withdrawals labeled petty cash in a system that should never, ever use petty cash. She attached a short memo explaining why each was unacceptable and flagged them for expanded testing. It was the polite version of "this looks like theft." She also asked for access to digital backups and any emails related to project approvals. We granted everything. Within a week, she sent a second memo increasing the scope because the anomalies weren't isolated, they were systemic. The numbers pointed to embezzlement above 50 grand, not counting sloppy mismanagement that might never be recoverable. I forwarded it to the interim board and added one sentence: "We continue as discussed. No leaks, no gloating, just process." Meanwhile, life went on. The pool sat there like a guilty conscience, the hedges still ragged. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years waved at each other on evening walks. I got used to the quiet thump of responsibility instead of the adrenaline of anger. If justice was coming, it would ride in on spreadsheets and sworn statements, not a pitchfork parade. The auditor asked for one more thing: interviews under oath for board members past and present, including Brad. 2 days later, a detective called to schedule a time to meet. We knew the audit could trigger law enforcement. We didn't expect it so quickly. The detective was professional and careful, the way folks are when they've done this before and don't want to spook a witness. He asked for a high-level overview, then zoomed in on dates, transfers, and signatures. He wanted to know who had check-writing authority, who approved reimbursements, and who possessed the debit cards. Our bylaws said one thing. Brad's practice had been another. I handed over copies of everything I'd compiled and made it clear I wasn't an expert, just a homeowner with time and irritation. The detective smiled at that and said accuracy beats expertise when you're dealing with numbers. He left with a banker's box and a chain of custody form we both signed. It felt serious in a way that made me breathe slower. Brad, predictably, started sending long, blustery emails to the board about witch hunts and defamation, claiming we had weaponized democracy. Our attorney replied once, politely, explaining the audit process and advising him to retain counsel. After that, silence, at least in our inboxes. On social media, the noise spiked. A couple of accounts defended Brad in vague terms about good men under attack, but the comments weren't friendly. Too many folks had read the report in that crowded room. Too many had told their neighbors. The detective scheduled interviews with former board members, and dominoes began to tip. One ex-secretary admitted Brad told her to lose inconvenient documents. The auditor's final report landed like a gavel. Embezzlement exceeding $50,000, systematic mislabeling of expenses, payments to entities connected to Brad, and gross negligence in financial controls. Her recommendations were clear: refer for criminal prosecution, file a civil suit for restitution, and implement guardrails yesterday. We voted to accept the report unanimously. Our attorney filed the criminal complaint with the supporting documentation. The detective already had most of it. We also voted to suspend Kyle and any company tied to him from current and future work pending outcomes. We notified the county procurement office with a copy of the audit, and they launched their own review because some of Kyle's bids had crossed over with city subcontracts. It was like tugging one string and watching a whole curtain slide down. Brad tried one last maneuver. He demanded a special meeting to clear his name. We scheduled it, set rules for comments, and kept a time limit so it wouldn't turn into a circus. He didn't show. His attorney sent a letter instead, full of legal fog and no facts. We entered it into the minutes for the record, thanked everyone for coming, and adjourned. Justice isn't cinematic. It's paperwork that survives other paperwork. Then came the warrant, and the neighborhood grapevine went electric. Word travels fast when squad cars park quietly on your street. No lights, no sirens, just two officers and a clipboard. Brad wasn't perp-walked. In real life, it's more boring, but the optics still stung him. He turned himself in later that day with an attorney, posted bond, and went home to a house that suddenly looked too big. The formal charges said what the audit implied: theft, fraud, falsifying records. These things take time, but the starting gun had been fired. We sent a calm, factual update to homeowners with 3 bullet points. Audit completed, law enforcement notified, civil action filed. No adjectives, no victory laps. We opened a Q&A page on the new HOA portal, uploaded past budgets in minutes, and posted a schedule for town hall-style meetings. People appreciated the sunlight. One neighbor even baked cookies for the auditor, which is about the most suburban thank you imaginable. Kyle didn't fare much better. The county issued a temporary ban on doing business pending investigation, and his crew trucks vanished from our streets overnight. That patio at Brad's suddenly looked like a monument to poor decisions. I mowed my grass and waved at anyone who looked my way. The most satisfying part wasn't punishment, it was repair. We still had to rebuild the HOA so this never happened again. We rewired the HOA like a house after a small fire. Careful, thorough, inspected twice. First, we passed term limits so no one could build a fiefdom by outweighting everyone else. Second, we required dual signatures on every check and added a monthly review by 2 non-officer homeowners chosen by lottery, which made funny money a lot harder to slip past. Third, we migrated all records to a cloud drive with access logs, so documents couldn't get lost without leaving footprints. Fourth, we locked in an annual independent audit, not just when someone smells smoke. We also built transparency from the ground up. Budgets, minutes, ongoing projects, and contracts all live behind a simple login any homeowner can use. You want to see who bid on the irrigation? 2 clicks. You want last year's pool chemicals cost? There it is. People stopped feeling like mushrooms, kept in the dark and fed garbage. They started showing up with ideas instead of suspicions. The pool reopened by Memorial Day with lifeguards and a posted maintenance schedule we actually followed. The landscaping crew started showing up on a real cadence, not just the week before an inspection. Dues went down, imagine that, after cutting bloat and fake admin costs. The neighborhood felt lighter, like we'd all been clinching without noticing. That's when I walked past Brad's place and saw a for sale sign. Word was he needed cash for restitution and legal bills fast. Brad sold at a discount, which is what happens when you convert reputation into kindling. A young family moved in. A teacher, a nurse, a kid who loves scooters. And within a month, the backyard projects were either permitted or gone. The new owner showed up at the next HOA meeting with a smile and a plate of brownies, which, honestly, felt like a cleansing ritual. We welcomed them with pool fobs and the lawn care schedule, not pitchforks. Meanwhile, whispers drifted over from 2 towns away that Brad had tried to join another HOA board. Someone Googled. The room laughed. He left before anyone had to say no out loud. I'm not thrilled about public shame, but I am a fan of consequences that follow you just far enough to make the next community safer. He'll have his day in court. We'll have our bylaws and our backups. Kyle's business listing went dark. The county kept its ban in place pending resolution, and your phone stops ringing when that banner appears next to your name. I heard he started looking for work out of state. I didn't celebrate. I went home and heated leftovers. All the while, the neighborhood kept rediscovering normal. Normal made me realize how angry I'd been without noticing it. Anger is loud at first, and then becomes a background hum if you let it. I didn't notice how constant it had been until it disappeared. Saturday mornings turned into coffee on the porch, not scanning for violations. The group chat shifted from anyone know what Brad's up to who's got a ladder I can borrow? The kids made up pool games with rules more sensible than our old bylaws. I fixed my fence stain on a sunny afternoon without a fine hanging over my head. A neighbor asked me if I felt like a hero. I told him no. Heroes run into burning buildings. I just read receipts and asked questions until the numbers confessed. What we did was community maintenance, like clearing a clogged drain so the whole street doesn't flood. It feels small while you're doing it, and enormous after you see the water move. We started a civics night, once a quarter, where we go over how our HOA actually works. People bring snacks and their curiosity. We explain insurance, reserves, and why certain line items exist at all. It's not thrilling, but it's stabilizing. Stability is a luxury after chaos. Every so often, someone asks for an update on Brad's case. I tell them the same thing. Courts move slow, but paper doesn't forget. I still walk past Brad's old house sometimes on my evening loop. The porch has a wind chime now. The hedges look squared away, the kind of tidy that doesn't announce itself. The new family waves when I pass, and their kid leaves chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Dragons, hopscotch, rocket ships. The pool lights glow at dusk like a promise we finally kept. Dues are lower than when I moved in. I like saying that sentence out loud because it used to feel impossible. The board is boring in the best way. We argue about practical things like mulch color and whether the grill needs replacing before the 4th. Minutes go online the next day without drama. If someone files a complaint, it's handled with adult voices and a calendar invite. We turned a franchise back into a neighborhood. Justice didn't taste like vengeance. It tasted like relief. And then, out of nowhere, an email pinged from a reporter downtown. A local reporter wanted a comment on the HOA fraud case making waves. I declined to be the star of anything and sent her the public audit in minutes. She did a fair piece, light on theatrics, heavy on facts, about how small systems fail when one person hogs the levers. She quoted the auditor and the detective and not a single anonymous neighbor. That felt right. The story closed with a simple line. The pool is open. Sometimes justice is plated, garnished, and savored, sure. But most days it's a sandwich at the kitchen counter after a long meeting, knowing your kids can bike to the pool and your email won't bite you. Brad moved on. We moved forward. If he ever tries another HOA, Google will introduce him properly. I keep a copy of the bylaws by my toolbox now and a spare binder on the shelf. Habits from a season I don't plan to repeat. People think the victory was removing one guy. The real win was replacing secrecy with sunlight and teaching a neighborhood how to check the lock together. If anything ever smells smoky again, we know exactly which doors to open first.